might as well.
Okay.
No,
Could you hold it? Yeah, thank you.
Oh, really? I would much rather you read.
No, you read first.
Okay.
The live stream is on.
Hi, everybody. All you millions out there.
Watch out for the nitrous.
Well, do you need to say anything?
I do.
Okay.
That's why.
Ready? Okay.
So I just wanted to welcome everybody here to East End Books in their traveling series this summer. Probably people who visited can see that what will eventually be a beautiful public park behind our store is being constructed, and so that's why we're not doing our oceanfront events this summer. So we just at every event are reminding people to look at the event page for all the events this summer, because we are all over. We have tonight we're thankful to our partners, wOMR, for tonight's event at the Davis Event Space, but and we'll have a few more events here, but we also have events, a lot of events in the Provincetown Library, in the Mark Jacobs Room there, at Fine Arts Work Center, Provincetown Art Society. So quickly, we always get asked, what do you need to really plan to grab some tickets that are going quick. Doris Kearns Goodwin on August 8th at the Provincetown Art Society. That's gonna be fun. That's a fundraiser for the Provincetown Art Society. You can, I think today they put it on their website, so you can see about getting tickets there. Doris will be in conversation with Kevin Sessoms. And then August 23rd, it's getting very full now. We have an event at the Fine Arts Work Center with Michael Cunningham in conversation with Ben Shattuck and a certain actress we loved in the audience, who's married to Ben. And that same group will have in the fall in Boston, when Jenny Slate's new book comes out in October. So that'll be up on the site soon. And then you'll see all the other events there. We have a lot of exciting things. There's a bunch of the books featured on the film are being made into series of movies. And so we have Adrienne Bordeaux on August 1st with Cynthia Newbury-Martin. Little Monsters, which is set in Wellfleet, is being made into a series, I think, with Apple TV. And then we have the next night, Dawn Tripp, who's got the fabulous historical fiction book about Jackie Kennedy, which it's barely been out, it's gone into a second printing. She's going to be here. So there's a lot of interesting things. There's really something for everyone, as there usually is that we do in the summer, and we just ask you to take a look at that. So I'm excited to have Garrard Conley here again for an event. And of course, I think you're teaching this week. You've been teaching
I've
this
been
week?
teaching at Fog.
Yeah, this week, yeah. So he's been there at Fine Arts Work Center, and we're excited to have him back here. I was lucky to get an early ARC, advanced review copy of All the World Beside. It's absolutely fantastic. His first, fiction.
First novel.
First novel. Yeah. Just absolutely brilliant. I think it's one of those books you cannot put down. And this is also one of the books that is also available as an audiobook. Not all of them are, so you can buy that on our website if you like. And I do want to remind people that if you're, most independent bookstores, in fact all of them, most of them can't compete with a certain big online company, and so can't give discounts, things like that. But there is a way to get some kind of a discount, and that's through bookshop.org, which is the alternative to Amazon, set up by a bunch of booksellers. And so basically, they have the bigger buying power, and you could get some books like this one, which hopefully you buy from me directly, but you could get a discount there by looking at their site, and each bookstore gets a tiny amount, so that's something there. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to leave it to Garrard to introduce our very special guest.
I didn't even realize I'd be introducing.
And then, so we'll do the normal thing. We'll have a reading and a conversation, and then a Q&A, and then there'll be a book signing. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Judge. Anne Hutchinson.
Here I am.
In the flesh.
It's me. I am the real.
Exactly. So I'll just tell the story of how I met you and
Okay.
how I asked for this event to happen, really.
Right. It's how you were doing research for you.
Yes. So I was like saying, I come here every year to talk and teach.
Oh, wow.
Yes. It's very tiring. At the end of the week. And I was doing research, right? And I was thinking, okay, I want to see more about Provincetown, understand more of it. And I saw that there was this Anne Hutchinson tour, which I thought was so strange because I'd been doing all this research on Anne Hutchinson in the flesh, who had, been banished.
Yeah.
And for speaking the truth about the Bible,
Indeed. Well,
some truth, whatever truth there is.
the truth is, you could throw it out.
She didn't say it that way.
But I heard that.
Yeah, you've had some centuries to reflect.
To summarize it.
Yeah. But
No one wants to hear a woman talk forever. So
I think I'd read a book called American Jezebel. Do you know that book?
Oh yeah.
Which sort of told about the life of Anne Hutchinson and had these brilliant sort of reconstructions of how she had argued with these men about the Bible. And I thought, what a great feminist figure to have existed in the 17th century, right? So it's just taking place before the events in my novel. And so I thought, well, I just need to go see who this performer is, right?
And I mean, I'm just a little offended because I was reading the book for a little while and then I had to come here. But I was on page, I think, 12 of this book. You mentioned me on page 12, so I still like Hawthorne a little better because he mentioned me on page 6.
Yeah.
I got you back on page 13 as a typo.
I know.
Oh.
Found the typo.
But it's because, put me a little earlier and then. Anyway, sorry.
I need you to find all the typos so I can get the paper back.
All right, I'll keep reading.
I figured you're a good reader. And then we went to a tour, and you were hilarious, of course.
Thank you.
You've had centuries to perfect that as well.
Indeed, yeah. Just keep going.
And I was so nervous to ask Anne. At the end of the tour, I came up really timidly, and I was like, "Oh, I'm a writer. I would really love to have you, speak with me or do some sort of event with me." And then
I went online and I realized that he knows Nicole Kidman.
Oh, you're forgetting the timing.
Sorry, that was
You're
after.
forgetting the timing because we were meeting
He was
in a
yeah,
coffee shop.
That's true.
And Anne was 35 minutes
I was
late.
35 minutes late. And then I found out that he knows Nicole Kidman.
And then she was a lot nicer after that.
Again, 400 years of filtering through people.
You've probably met a lot of dead famous
Yeah.
people,
But now I know how to say your name.
That's good.
Right. Yeah. But there's wine in the audience, right? So it's a drinking game. If I say his name wrong, you just have a drink. It's the 2 R's. There's just
Too many R's.
yeah.
Too many. But anyway, I think you're fabulous. I watch all of your Instagram things. I don't know if you're on TikTok or anything like that.
I can't do TikTok.
Okay.
It's too much energy.
We were on the weather report together.
We were on the weather report as well.
Brent was.
Yeah.
But-
Anne was resting.
Yeah.
Much like one of the characters in your book.
For a long time. Yeah.
There's a woman in this book who goes to sleep every day at 1 p.m. and does not wake up. Sorry.
Historically accurate.
I can say anything, right? Like, I
You
don't
can
want
say
to
anything
ruin
you
any
want.
surprises.
No, say all of it.
Okay.
Spoil it.
Yeah, she's my favorite character so far.
Yeah, you're gonna love her in
As she continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She gets pretty wild.
Does she become a lesbian?
Become?
Or just I'm sorry.
I don't know.
We'll find out.
Yeah. So this is Anne.
Hello, my name's Anne.
What are we doing now?
Well, I think you wanted to read from
Just
the
a little
book,
bit.
right?
Yeah.
Should I say my version of the story of how I met you?
Yeah,
Well,
if you'd
you
like.
gave a pretty good version.
Is there more to add?
No, I don't think so.
We did have one too many drinks and we got a little flirty. So
Yes, that was true. That
Yeah.
happened.
Right, a day
Yeah.
ago.
Well, we were having lunch and he said, "Well, I just got a divorce." And I
Well, now it is on the internet.
I love your book. I love your book.
Okay, so should I read some?
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to see which part you read.
I'm actually gonna read from the research.
Not from the actual book. Okay.
Yeah, you're gonna read from the actual book.
I am.
You're gonna make it sound beautiful in your British. So
There's so much to share.
So I'm going to read just a little part of the research note because I think this is a fun crowd for this. I did a lot of research. I had maybe 500 sources altogether, and I had a research assistant who helped me put this together. And then I got to write this research note at the end, and it's called The Unfathomable, a note on the research for all the world beside. And I'll just start. Okay. Imagine a
Gosh, am I supposed to stare at him when he reads that?
Whatever you want. Look at it to his eyes lovingly.
It's awkward. You don't really know what to do.
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, usually there's kind of a coding, but I like this better.
If it gets boring, I'll just pull down my skirt.
You're sorry. Okay. Imagine a club where a group of men get together in the evenings to gossip, fuck, dress as women, and stage outrageous performances. A place where one might adopt an over-the-top persona by the name of Princess Seraphina, Fanny Murray, or Queen Irons. The men hug, dance, play, sit on one another's laps, kiss passionately. If you're reading this book, you already know my scenario as a setup. We're speaking of an 18th century club, not one from the 21st century, and we must be careful not to impose our contemporary notions of identity onto the past. According to Daddy Foucault, in his The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, An Introduction, homosexuals were invented in the 19th century. But scenarios such as those described above have been documented in great detail, largely from police reports. So much of our history has been told to us by police. In Male-Male Intimacy in Early America by William Benjamin. And so, go ahead, walk inside, take a closer look for research purposes. This club is exclusive, not just anyone can waltz in, and there's a chance that drawing too much attention will entice the police to raid, as they are wont to do when these private gatherings grow too public. A man thus arrested might, depending on race, wealth, and social status, be accused of or even charged with sodomy. He would likely be marked for life. He may have faced similar fears when meeting a man in the pleasure gardens, think cruising spot, or at a tavern, one of those seedy establishments down by the wharves. You know the drill. Sneak into a toilet, cock in hand, decide who is top, active, and who is bottom, passive. Again, this scenario is from a police report. We really kept them busy. The accounts in Benjamin's book are, shall we say, steamy. Here's a brief example. Quote, I was picked up by an individual who had his cock, sans vie, in his hand and asked me if I had a hard-on, and approaching me wanted to put his hand in my breeches. He said that he shouldn't expose himself in this spot, and asked me if I had a room where we could go to jack off from there to be, or to screw. He also told me that for the last 20 years he had been involved in the gay life, la bardaresh, I can't do that, because my French is bad. Can you do this? And that he knew many footmen with whom he amused himself very often, jacking off or screwing them as often as they wanted it. It sounds so much better in French, doesn't it? Paris, London, Berlin. As an 18th century gentleman, you would know where to go looking for it. Dense, crowded cities, all those bodies packed together. People whispered about it. Sometimes you could read a broadside about a particularly scandalous sodomy case. On the books, the punishment was death throughout much of the century. If you lived in France, you might only be sent to the Bicêtre hospital, where you would be watched for signs of religious conversion. I know what you're thinking. This seems really gay. Didn't I basically just cite what some might consider to be an early example of conversion therapy? But we're talking about sex, not love. And when it comes to queer people throughout the centuries, we, as sober scholars, must hold the queers to a higher standard. Desperately craving a bottom session from a rugged seaman is only one part of the equation. An act does not an identity make. For me, at least, an echo from my childhood, hate the sin, not the sinner. Really, with all those crowded bodies in one city, it's no wonder a few aberrations would practice sodomy. That humans have been doing it in nearly every century, in no way connotes a fixed identity. So now we come to romantic friendships, a category that by no means suffers from broad generalizations about human life in the 18th century. The reasoning goes that before the word homosexual muddied the waters in the late 19th century, same-sex relationships were often romantically expressive, dotingly physical, and entirely platonic. As important context, the term homosexuality was called sexual inversion first, 1883, then homosexual, 1892, in an English translation of Richard Frere von Krafft-Ebing's Psychopathia Sexualis in 1886. Yes, that's sexual psychopath, a phrase you might hear uttered by at least a dozen politicians in 2024, the year this book is being published. Any historical letters we might find between two men take on what we perceive as homoerotic overtones must be read primarily as part of the literary conventions of the time. Take an example from Richard Godbeer's The Overflowing of Friendship, citing a letter written between two men in 1800, emphases mine. Quote, that we should beware of leaping to so unwarranted conclusion about the kinds of intimacy that dear chums enjoyed when lying warm together. It is of course not inconceivable that in some instances those pleasures might have included erotic stimulation or even sexual activity. Some letters are a good deal more suggestive than others in expressing nostalgia for nights spent with a close friend. Virgil Maxey assured his chum, William Blanding, that he missed sleeping with him. I get to hugging the pillow, he declared, instead of you. Sometimes, he wrote, I think I've got hold of your doodle, when in reality I have hold of the bedpost. A doodle, that could be confused with a bedpost, was hardly in a state of repose. And Maxey signed his particular letter, Your Cunt Humble. 1800s. 1800s, exactly. One cannot help but wonder. This is what the scholar said in response to that. Stop there and just sort of talk about this now. So I found these letters between these two men where, you know, the guy's like, I get to thinking about your doodle. And
What's a doodle?
a doodle is exactly what you think it
But
is.
why are they calling it a doodle?
I looked at the etymology
Is
for
it
it.
because it's covered in the other guy's shit? Like,
Oh,
doodle.
That's exactly what I thought you would be
More etymological.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways,
But it is a penis. And then
that's
you
what
know,
they say when I'm looking up at someone. It is a penis.
and then Cunt Humble was just such a shocking moment too. You know, it's like almost something you would see right now.
That's,
on
I mean,
Reddit.
that really, yeah.
I think you should use it in your profiles.
I could definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your Cunt Humble.
And what does your profile say?
I don't have one.
Oh, mine says, don't look like my pictures.
And then you're doing impossible. It's
I'm
fine.
sorry.
It's great. And then I got obsessed with this letter, and I looked it up to see if other people had gotten obsessed with it. And of course, Larry Kramer had gotten obsessed with it at one point, and he wrote for the Gay and Lesbian Review in like 2004. He was really, really mad. And of course, he was always really sort of screed. And it was a beautiful screed, sort of talking about how this guy who had written this book, Godbeer, which is such a great name, he was a straight historian who had completely whitewashed all of this stuff. And I agreed with him, although, you know, you have to be careful with reading our identities into the past. But I did generally agree with Larry Kramer's argument that, you know, these historians will assume that these letters between straight people are always sexual. You know, they just sort of assume that. And when it's two men, they just, even when it says cunt humble, they're like, one cannot help but wonder. And I wrote in my book, if you go on with the note, you know, sort of talk about how I think that Larry Kramer wants us to find, you know, a wooden dildo or something like Abraham Lincoln's bedroom. Like that's the only way we'll sort of know for sure. But there's just like, there's no way to know. And I think in some ways, fiction is the place where we can expand those possibilities and sort of think about, well, what if, and even if these things weren't necessarily exactly what we think they were, it's a place where we can sort of imagine ourselves in these other times. And yeah, it's a fine line to walk whenever you're trying to write a narrative that way, because you don't want to completely tip over into like wish fulfillment, but you know, there's some sexy moments in it.
Yeah, I mean, I read that portion today, and the way you analyzed sort of the spectrum of is it real or is it not, you kind of, I think you even said, like, the historian would be right in that even if you find a dildo in Lincoln's bedroom, you don't know.
You don't know.
And I just thought you were saying that, you know, queer people are imaginary, I don't know. But it is interesting to think about, like you said in that piece, that, you know, we have to imagine. And I was going to ask, you know, what do you think it is about being queer that makes us, you know, have to imagine, or better at imagining, if that's the case?
Well, we're consistently told that we're sort of a new invention, right? Like, sort of, people tend to do that. And then, you know, whenever you argue for these different moments in culture that we've sort of identified with as children, you know, like the Greeks, or, you know, and if you go too far into that, you know, people will call you a child molester or something. I always feel like there's always this sort of brick wall that you meet as a reader or as a thinker when you're younger and you're queer and you're sort of understanding yourself and you're trying to find these examples. And then every turn you make, people are like, no, that's not it. No, that can't be it. And yet we can assume that, like, I think I talk about this in here, like, we can read Jane Austen, right? And Jane Austen is in a different century from us, right? And we can say, oh, well, the courtship rituals of Jane Austen are not our rituals today. Straightness is not what it is today, and yet we all feel that love, right? We all go into those stories with like complete romantic attachment to these things, and we're like, oh, if only, you know?
So straight people get to
They get to do that, and we don't get to do that because we're always told like, oh no, but look at these particulars. That can't be true. Never know, right? And even some of the reviews of this book have argued that, you know, and I think a lot of historical fiction gets that kind of flack, where it's like, oh well, you went too far with imagining.
That's why it's fiction.
Yeah, and I think the imaginative act, like the reason I modeled a lot of this off of Hawthorne, right? Hawthorne was writing about 2 centuries before his life, right? People forget that because when we get into later centuries, we're like, oh, it's all old, right? So he must have known how they talked.
Well, that's why I'm allowed to do my costume, because I just wear an old piece and they're like, oh,
It's all old. Yeah.
You
Exactly.
can always work stupidity to your face.
Drag. Sort of fiction is kind of drag.
It is drag.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, we don't allow for, like, we can still talk about Jane Austen, about the differences, and they can enrich our understanding of the love story, right? But when we do this with other books, and anyway, I was talking about Hawthorne.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. So Hawthorne was writing like 2 centuries before him. He was imagining a world, right? He had a lot of, you know, historical antecedents he could rely on, but he totally made up sort of finding the Scarlet Letter in this like cabinet, you know, and he was working at the Custom House, right? And that's the first 40 pages of the Scarlet Letter. It's this wonderful, sort of boring, bureaucratic.
It's not boring.
It's not
He
boring
talks
at all.
about my burning
No,
bush.
it's not boring at all. But I mean, he's talking about a boring, bureaucratic world. And he's writing about another.
That's where he talks about my bush.
He does. He does. You're in it several times. And then like, you know, so you can sort of, you can see if you research him enough that he was using a lot of imagination to re-enter that place. And he was actually doing something very radical by sort of painting the pilgrims in a very specific way that they wouldn't have seen themselves as. But he was using his present moment to reflect on the past, which is what we do in historical fiction, and I don't understand why people don't understand that.
Well, for me too, I think I just go with the idea, because when you live in Provincetown, you have a fight with someone every day. And eventually you come to realize that literally everyone's reality is different, and we're all creating, in my opinion, our own fiction, whether it's about 200 years ago or 2 seconds ago. Nothing is real. You and I, before we started to flirt with each other, talked about how we both agree that life is kind of a simulation.
Yes.
And so, and what I was trying to maybe get into is that I think because if you are queer, you sort of are forced to live in a simulation, because you're forced to live what is not your reality. And so I think it's easier for queer people to kind of say like, oh, maybe, and then run with it. Whereas some of those stodgy history people, they can't deal with it. But
Yeah, we have good imagination.
why do you think in the late 19th century is when it became more of an identity thing versus a act or something like that. And did you find any of that in your research as to why it was that moment in time?
I don't think I was able to really find that. I mean, you know, Foucault's being a little bit, as he always is, kind of flippant about it, right? Like, oh, we were born in that time. And I think he's not, I don't know, I mean, I don't think he's always completely serious about those things, right?
Because he's gay.
Yeah. But I think, you know, words have a lot of power, right? So homosexual, whenever that word is used, it has a very specific hold over all of us, and has a very historical meaning that can bring with it associations, right? So like, all identity is constantly shifting, right? But we just pretend like man and woman, husband and wife are these stable identities. They're not at all. And in fact, you know, if you look at the 18th century stage, right? So that was sort of my specialty in my master's. There was this character that I started to study, you know, the fop character. Do y'all know about the fop? Sort of like a dandy character. And it's really interesting if you watch this moment where masculinity becomes something specific to a culture, right? It becomes encoded in one way. So the dandy was a stage character, sort of type of stage character that was just a ladies' man, but very well dressed, would often hang out in the women's dressing rooms and sort of flirt with them and then eventually get under their skirts. That was the dandy, right? But then suddenly there was the appearance of the fop, who was just like the dandy in almost every way, except you knew he wasn't going to sleep with the women, right? And then when that happened, you could see sort of on the stage specifically how the coded characters who were supposed to be more straight, right, or like more traditional, were backing away from the more elaborate costuming and turning into the sort of mask, sort of buttoned up look that would contrast. So it shifted on the stage, like as the culture was shifting. And these things happen all the time, right? Like what we see as masculine is totally different from what other people saw as masculine at different times. What we see as male is very different. And so I think, to answer your question, it's just sort of like some people assume, straight people, right, assume that things have always been this way, and they just haven't. And to be queer or a queer thinker, I think you are constantly questioning that and saying, you know, in the sort of Judith Butler way, it's performance, like all these things.
Right. It would be so interesting to see if there was something culturally at that moment that allowed this identity to be more of a space, whereas like maybe before that, you weren't allowed to be the full entity of queer.
I guess I wonder if, you know, I have no idea, this is going to be something.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about.
But I do wonder if like it's because, you know, we were starting to get into psychological understandings. And so there was a kind of pathological element associated with homosexual, right?
We'll have to find out.
Yeah.
I have another question about that, but it has passed me.
That's okay.
Let's read a little more book. So when I was reading the book, I identified with the bitter wife. Surprise, surprise. And it might not be that long, but I would like to read it. Perfect. Okay. Claim him, my mother said to me from her deathbed, or some whore will. She respected Reverend Nathaniel Whitfield's heir of the old country. More than that, she knew he was the best man I could find, since I was the plainest of the three sisters. The dress I wore to the meeting house was white, simple, but I embroidered it with fine lion's tooth, hair done up in a plain bun. Nothing I could do to my face without looking like one of those whores. I always seemed to imagine everywhere, though I did bite my lips just seconds before entering. I have wonderful lips. I've always been very proud of my lips. Look at your sweet mother's lips when she bites them. You too have them. Father's stern frown and mother's lips. It's the devil, so don't spend too much time thinking you're special. Just a nice little thing to know. Whose features do you reckon young Ezekiel shall favor? I see your father in them, yeah, they're the rest is the mystery, I suppose, until he's older. He'd bite them like this, not too hard. I stood in the back of the sanctuary, biting my lips, for it was far too crowded to sit in my usual place beside Father, and I watched this London minister tilt his head back to the ceiling and sing God's praises. I felt something in my belly here, right here. This is where you'll feel it one day as I watched him pound the pulpit with his fist, his face red, tears streaming down his face. It was strange to see such emotion in a man. He cried before us all, but it had the opposite effect it usually had. You might see a man crying on the street at night, usually a drunk. You know.
So many more books.
Did Nicole want to talk?
No.
Just talk about Nicole.
Yeah. But wait, I want to talk about that performance. That was amazing.
Oh, I know. Well, I told you, no, that's not really how she's actually saying it.
No, actually, what I love about this is that it's exactly how I imagined it. I mean, she is dramatic, and she's sort of having this nervous breakdown, as gays love to write about women. You know, we love to have one on the edge. And she is sort of having this moment where she's telling her daughter, the scenario is that she's telling her daughter, Sarah, everything about her marriage, right? Way too much. And it's this terrifying.
Sarah knows.
Sarah knows that
About the marriage.
Well, Sarah knows that she's just seen these two men forced together, and her father is one of them, the minister, and the other one is the physician in town. And so the context of the mother sort of sharing this backstory of the marriage is really excruciating if you think about it from Sarah's perspective.
Yeah.
Like, this is too much.
I know the mother falls asleep before Sarah can be like, that doesn't explain it, mommy.
Yeah.
And is there a metaphor there with the, like, you know, she's going in and out of consciousness kind of, while the daughter is trying to learn how to deal with it, and it's like, honey, just go in and out of consciousness like your mother.
She's just sort of, you know, I was trying to figure out a way to write about depression, and you know,
But
I guess
once we start dating, you won't.
the experience of depression is like there's this sort of, you know, I sleep a lot when I'm depressed, and so and you know, I guess I can just say everything on this. You know, my mom has gone through episodes of that, and so I was kind of building into that, like, how would you talk about that in a time period that wouldn't have a word like depression? And everyone just thinks she's lazy and horrible and that sort of.
Well, my other favorite part so far, as I was telling you, is when there's these women in the center of town, and you know, they're sort of talking about this woman that I just read as, and the women are saying like, oh, she's sleeping all day. Your husband is going for very long walks.
There's a lot of that.
It's good and it's very subtle, but it's like, you know, and you're imprinting, like you say in the ending piece, like you're putting our sort of way of seeing this culture.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in really small town America in Arkansas, you know, and so our first town that we lived in was 100 people, and you can imagine the only gathering place was the church. Like, that was it. You had a potluck. You went, you know, Wednesday nights, Sunday morning and night. If you didn't go Wednesday night, they'd call you out. It was a whole thing. It was horrible.
How would they call you out? Like, what's one of the
Oh, well, you know.
They would literally just.
They'd be like, "Oh, it's so good to see you."
No.
What were you doing? You know, I mean, sometimes they ask you what you were doing Wednesday night, and you're like, watching a sinful movie on HBO.
I mean, in Provincetown, we all experience that. I saw you, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure.
I saw you going down those stairs.
The wars. That's where all the action happens.
Yeah, well, if
Wars
anyone
are always
says there's not a
dramatic.
lot of sex in the book, there's a lot of like references to
I think
sexual
the language
activity.
is sort of sensual.
Yeah, I liked the wolf piece. Speaking of research, okay, there's a character in the book who is one of the main men that are, you know, having sex with each other. And he really wants the child of the depressed woman to be his child.
Yeah.
So I think you need to do more research because I don't know one gay man that wants a fucking child.
Well, you know, it's sort of a male-male impreg fantasy. You know,
It's interesting.
I mean, I had a student once. I mean, I learned a lot from my students, and you know, my students are obsessed with, like, I don't know what they call it now, but it was like fan fiction and all that stuff. You know, the internet stories that they take like famous characters and do like slash fiction, I think it's called, and like imagine people having sex that wouldn't normally. And it's always like some sort of like dragon or something. So they go really well.
They write these stories.
Yeah, they write all these stories, and it's really filthy.
How do you grade that? Like, how
I
do you...
mean, well, they don't submit them usually to my class, but if they do, I let them.
Oh,
It's
okay.
fine. You can write smut. It's okay.
Okay.
It's a state school. It's really interesting. Georgia, no less. I haven't gotten fired yet.
You're going to go 10 years soon.
Yeah, I'm supposed to this year. But let's hope they don't write any of those. But one student came up to me and said, you know, have you read any male-male impreg fantasy? And I said, no. What should I be reading? You know, and they were telling me about it. You know, apparently this is a big thing now. Mostly straight women read it, which is hilarious. These men miraculously becoming pregnant, and sort of then they all have to deal with it, and that's part of the narrative. It's, I don't know. I read a few of them. They were interesting. And I thought, well, let's try it.
Yeah.
And you know, because I did a lot of reading on it. Have you heard of onanism? It was a very famous sort of text in the 18th century. The sin of onanism, which it's another word for masturbation.
Oh.
Like, and I think it comes from like one, like as in you're doing things by yourself, right?
Oh,
And it was onanism, and it was seen as very, very sinful, you know, because you're wasting your seed.
Right.
You shouldn't be doing that. And so I thought, well, why not play with that? Because there was a lot of misunderstanding around like how things were, you know, how pregnancy worked, how women's parts worked. Nobody seemed to know or care, right? And so there was like an opportunity, really a fictive opportunity for even a physician to sort of be like, well, we did couple right before you slept with your wife after, you know, which is sort of like a point of contention, because why did Whitfield go from that to sleeping with Catherine?
Right.
And in my book, I sort of like posit that my minister character is sort of bisexual, according to today's terminology.
And then the other interesting thing that I felt is that when you read like a marketing piece about the book, it's about like, you know, a gay love story, gay love story, gay love story, but most of the book is women.
Yeah.
It's not really, I mean, I've been reading like, and I feel like I'm far away, but I feel very...
It goes in close up a few times.
Oh,
The
okay.
sex.
All right.
The like 30-page intimate.
There is a 30, there's a 30
I don't know if it's
page.
30. It's like, it's not 30. I'm trying to sell it, yeah.
Oh,
But you know, there are like these close-up moments, and I did that on purpose. I think I became interested in how these two families of these two men navigated their relationship in many ways, because you know, almost every one of these family members in my mind is queer in some way, right? Like Sarah could be asexual, Catherine could be a lesbian, as you said. Like, you know, I sort of played with that in my mind, like who knows what their identities really are, because they don't, right? And so I thought about like this sort of nuclear family that was also queer, happened to also be queer family, and like how could they protect each other or protect their secrets or sort of love each other in spite of the fact that there's all this complication. And so that became sort of the theme of the book, which I guess you can't choose your themes, you know, like my first book was about conversion therapy, but really it was about my family.
Right.
And so I think I'm just sort of interested in that subject.
Do you, I guess what I'm trying to say is that like in the character pieces too though, I feel closer to the women.
Yeah.
Was that on purpose, or I know it's a hard one.
I think I hope I write women characters really well. You know, I feel like being so close to my mom and also just sort of my introduction to what I loved was always through women and sort of you know, gossip and you know, not to follow every stereotype that exists for me, but I sort of do. And I think that there's a love there. that is very natural. And maybe when you're writing about a fraught relationship in this way, I mean, I do think that, you know, there are happy moments in here, and I do think I've written a happy ending, but, you know, it's very fraught. You have a minister in the 18th century who's in love with another man, right? And how do I get into that character? Well, you know, I go back to some dark places in my own life. And so maybe there's a kind of distance in there, right? I don't know.
It's also interesting, and again, you go into it in the ending piece, but it's all through, like you said, the act and not the person. So it's interesting to read it from a modern perspective where it's like, they literally just look at it as something bad that they're doing, and then they try and find God again. And like, this is the way humanity is.
And there's this moment sort of in the center of the book, which I hope is echoed in the ending, which is kind of this opening up where I don't want to give too much away. And the minister sort of
He just sits on his fist.
there's no fisting.
No. Should I write the end? Fan fiction is not a business plan.
That'll explode. So, no, but there's this moment where, you know, after the act is completed, there is this moment of romance, and I think the minister is very surprised by this and pleased by this in some ways. I mean, of course, it complicates everything, but it's a beautiful little moment in there.
You can ruin the surprise, but which one is the top and which one is the bottom?
The minister is the boss.
Is the bottom. Okay, so
They could have been verse. I don't. They'll get to verse. I feel
eventually.
If they had been able to, they would have.
So who has more money? Who has more money, your agent or Kamala Harris's husband?
You know,
I said bitch.
it might be my agent because she's also married to Colson Whitehead.
Oh, who's that?
Mm.
He wrote the Underground Railroad and
Yeah.
all these great Nickel Boys, and they're like so fancy. She won't answer my phone calls. She's like, I mean, one time I texted her and she said, BRB talking to Oprah. I was like, that's fine. It's fine.
Well, then let's talk about the cover as well.
Oh, thank you.
Did you design or?
I did not design it.
Okay.
That would be wild.
What was the process? Just bring us into the publishing process. They change everything you write. Okay.
Yeah.
And then they say, this is the cover. What if you don't like the
You
cover?
can change it. Well, it depends on your agent. If your agent has a contract built in, like first refusal or something like that, or I think you can refuse like a couple of times and then finally they get mad at you and say, you gotta choose something. But this was the first one actually, and my agent loved it, and I'm scared of her, and so I thought it's probably good.
That's a powerful person.
Yeah, but also I thought it's fun, it's playful. You know, I like this was before Barbie came out, so at least it's not Barbie pink, you know.
Oh, you decided on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
before Barbie came out.
But,
No, but I didn't know that.
That's good. Yeah, I like it. I think it's fun. What about you?
I like it. No, I like it. I was just wondering if there was a
The
story
British,
behind it or
the UK version is actually
just a dick or just unsubstantiated.
Sorry. Sorry to be like that way. I don't think Riverhead's watching. It'll be fine. They designed a beautiful cover, and then at Grove Atlantic, it's a bigger book. The book itself is more beautiful, and I think the writing, the spacing is better. And then they embossed it.
Nice.
They embossed it. So this one's sort of
The East End Books guy just turned up the lights.
they're not watching this
Or a
part.
British book at his store.
But it's still really beautiful if you get it.
It is.
Is it an American author? I mean, American artist?
This is the U.S.
But is it an American artist or is it a British artist?
Oh, this is an American artist. Let's see who it is. I think we should say, right? I don't know. How much time do we have?
There should be a jacket credits in there.
Oh, it's over here.
Micromantics, which is AI.
This is
Who's
not.
Micromantics?
Oh, that's the image.
Oh, sorry.
But the design was Caitlin Call.
Oh, God.
Hmm.
Yeah. But a fun fact is that my author photograph is from Brandon Taylor, the author. So that was fun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I have a lot of little Easter eggs in here.
Taylor Swift.
Yes, she's in here somewhere.
Should we open it up to crowd questions?
I don't know. What time is it? Do we have?
Yeah, we've got time. I think you were very lucky to have any input on the book cover, because normally the authors don't have any input at all, like even the right to make a couple no's, say no, usually it's like we're presenting it with it.
The great thing
Yeah.
about having an agent that slightly terrifies me is that she terrifies others. So that's what you need. You need to sell things and be a little scary sometimes. Yeah. So, any questions from the audience or any comments or anything?
I started reading Emma this summer. This is like my summer read, and I liked what you guys were saying of like it is like a different way of like courtship and like the language that they use about relationships. But when you're reading it, we kind of are still doing the same thing, and it's the same dynamic. It's just different language.
So why wouldn't it be like that for queer people to a certain extent?
Yeah, it's just the language wasn't there. But do you know what plays were being put on when like the fop and Dandy characters were on stage?
Yeah, they were like 18th century, so you're sort of who was writing plays. I'm gonna be horrible with my research here, but After Ben was one playwright. I'm trying to think of ones that people would know. Cosgrove, who did like all the
I think they wrote The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, we need a timeline.
Anyway, so it was mid 18th century, after Charles II returned to England. So the Restoration period was sort of the big revival of theater, or it was like a big burst in theater. And so I think that was kind of when it was happening. And you had other interesting characters during that time, right? So like the Libertine, who was famously bisexual, right? Always just sleeping with everyone. And everyone knew about the pleasure gardens, which were, everyone knows about the pleasure gardens, which were big cruising grounds, and, very sinful places to go.
So is this the same time as the Marquis de Sade? I tried to give that book to Anne and she refused it.
I don't know, when was Marquis de Sade?
Good question.
Sorry.
Is
Look
that
it up.
the guy? I think it was
S&M,
I think it was.
probably.
Yeah.
Basically,
it's so
mystery
extreme.
our understanding of S&M. Yeah, crazy stuff. Completely wild stuff. And then also, the Earl of Rochester, who was a very famous libertine, wrote a play, Sodom and Gomorrah, which was very fun, and featured like wooden dildos on stage, sort of like not actually being inserted, but sort of playfully. Yeah.
Like showgirls.
Yeah. So everyone likes to think we invented bodiness and queerness and all of our crazy kinky stuff. Yeah, the stuff in purgatory is happening like a long time ago in a much more interesting way, probably. Oh, well, I've got to talk about molly houses. Do y'all know about molly houses? Wow. So when I learned about molly houses, it was really exciting. There were these sort of, you had to be wealthy and white.
And then you wrote it into your goddess.
Different kind of molly house. And in the 18th century, these men would sort of congregate together in these private establishments in London, and they would do really crazy things. So one thing that I heard about was that there was a faux wedding performance where two men dressed in sort of bridal gowns and poured pig's blood all over themselves as part of the ceremony. And they were like, "We're married now," because they were mocking marriage because they thought marriage was stupid. And again, everyone thinks they've like made, oh, we're being so queer and radical. We were already doing that a long time ago.
I always go back to like, why is that? And I wonder if it's like, back in that day, they had media, but the media wasn't as all reaching as it became in the 20th century.
It would be broadsides. You know?
Yeah, but when the media became even more reaching,
Mhm.
I think the media was very straight, and now we're finally seeing that same media open up a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's why everyone thinks it's new, because it's like, oh, that's on TV, but like,
Yeah, it was all hidden away. It was like you had to know which house to go to see the great performance that the drag queen was throwing on. You know, like there was a lot of drag going on in Molly houses. So, yeah, drag has a long history.
don't I know?
I had a question. In ancient cultures, it just is male-to-male sex is okay,
Mm-hmm.
and
I mean, some,
it's-
yeah.
and then you will procreate anyway. But is it when organized religion comes in that the sin part comes in, and it becomes identified as a lifestyle, and because you're not going to procreate, so you're not going
Yeah.
to help the tribe continue this. Is that when the big
I mean, I
change
think
comes?
everything's probably tied to, I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't want to pretend to be some sort of great theorist, you know, here. I'm not Foucault at all. But I do think that probably it's always been about marriage and sort of being the tie to power, right? So having this sort of ordered way of structuring a family, right? And saying family is the building block. And it's easier to sort of control people if we have, you know, records of these unions that cannot be broken except by paying large sums, right? And it's easier to control just individual citizens that way. So I do personally think that, yes, the reason why queerness is such a threat to people throughout the centuries, or civilizations really, is that it's all fine and good as long as you go home to your wife and continue to procreate and serve the state however you need to, right? But whenever you're just going off and being a fairy with somebody, well, what are you contributing? Because really, you know, aside from art, which nobody loves, right? Everyone like wants to consume art, but they don't like artists, right? The artist has always been sort of treated a certain way, as aberrant or just scary, as a threat in some way,
I'm
right?
thinking about my HOA right now.
Well, yeah, right? Because like if you're in a neighborhood and especially a buttoned up neighborhood, right? And you come waltzing in like that, they're gonna have certain reactions.
I'm the quietest one.
Right? But I mean, things don't change that way. I think that there's a kind of,
I like what you said. I would also, because I want to be Foucault,
place.
guess that there's also like a minority element to it where it's like, you know, just biologically the key is that being queer is
Less common.
and so it's less common and it has less of an input on what is right and wrong in society, I would guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because is it really less common?
Yeah. But it seemed like having your little boy on the side was fine.
That's fine.
But so, and when does that change? And I would think it would be when Christianity comes in.
Yeah.
And then also that you don't want priests to marry because they're gonna bring in people that are gonna take money from the church, so you don't want to do that. But it seemed that before that it was fine.
I think it's about control, right? And I think
Yeah.
I like to think of, you know, I think it can get exhausting to think only in terms of queerness or identity, right? So sometimes I just think we're all, you know, queerness is kind of synonymous for me with artists or artistry in a way.
In this town.
Yeah, in this town it certainly is, right?
Literally.
Yeah.
Something different, right? Something that challenges the status quo, something that is there to reflect often an unflattering culture, right? And unflatteringly the culture, right? And that carries risks, right? And unless you have, you know, a powerful royal backer, right, that you're protected by, right, then you're going to be sort of out of luck. And so I think, you know, anything that challenges these norms is seen as dangerous. And we're seeing that now because we're so much more visible. I mean, I think there's this interesting thing that's happening where, especially with trans youth, right, like more visibility is not always a good thing, right? There's this horrible backlash that occurs when visibility becomes at a certain level. And I think that's a thing that we haven't quite learned how to navigate yet because it's very new, right? We didn't have trans people on the cover of our magazines until like 10 years ago. And so all of this is very new, and everyone thinks, you know, oh God, everyone's taking over, queerness is like brainwashing our kids, blah, blah, blah. Well, the reason they're thinking that is because we haven't been visible that way before. And so they're not used to it. And they're like, well, what do we do with our power? Like, how do we keep our power going? They're so much more talented than the rest of us.
Maybe we'll have some really good books from those people because they're going through it and they're creating good books.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's already great trans literature out there.
No, I mean like by the conservative
Oh, the
people.
crazy
Since
conservative.
they're finally experiencing
finding-
some
they're
problem in
finding-
their lives. And they're
It's beautiful. Let's hope. Yes.
Well, even by just saying to somebody, I'm going to Provincetown, well then, boing,
Yeah.
whether you are,
What's your
whatever,
problem?
then that's like, you know,
Yeah.
I'm going to Truro, but I might go to,
Yeah,
you
to have my fair.
People have told me that they used to say when they were coming to Provincetown, they'd tell their family, "Oh, I'm going up."
Oh, yeah, that's what we did. I'm going to Wellfleet.
Yeah.
The oysters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your question?
My question, what's my question?
Oh.
Between Boy Erased and this book, there's also like some similar themes, religion, sexuality. What are some of the other themes that cut across all the ones about your life, one's fiction, but what did you find yourself sort of thinking about over and over again?
I was pretty surprised by, writing this book. I thought this is so different from a memoir, and there's no way I'm writing about Boy Erased anymore, and of course, like every time you think that, you look at it again and you see that you're just writing about the same things over and over again. So I like to think of this book as a kind of receptacle of the things that I couldn't necessarily put in Boy Erased. So like, when you write a memoir, you have to be very careful about how you frame yes, and how you frame your family and like how you. I worried about lying all the time. I was like,
I can't wait to write a memoir and just lie.
I should have, because like half my family hates me now. I told all the secrets, but I did keep quite a few secrets to myself, and so I think this book is kind of a way to explore some of those other things that I wasn't able to explore in Boy Erased, and to imagine maybe a family handling things a bit differently. And I think that was part of it. Now I'm writing this televangelist novel in the 90s. I'm calling it my big hair novel. And I was like, I'm gonna do sexuality and religion, but it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be zany, it's gonna be a wild ride. I think all that's true, but like I'm halfway through and I'm like, oh, there are the themes again. There are those days coming back.
Isn't that how an artist is?
Yeah.
I mean, every artist has a niche.
Yeah.
And a thing that they do,
I
and
think
that's
so.
why they become important.
Yeah.
So
I think we always want to rebel against that. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to be free,
right.
you're like, leave me alone. Like I don't want to talk about this anymore.
Like Christina Aguilera in the stripped album. Get up and dance, and she's like, no. Now she doesn't have a career anymore. But don't be my point. Don't be down on yourself like that, because you can have the same theme
Yeah.
and hit it again and again and again and again, and it will move people because it's an important theme.
Oh, thank you.
Oh.
All right, I'll just bend over now.
And now the interactive portion of the show.
I guess, are we? What are we on? Oh, yeah.
So, well, no,
thought that was.
We have to move on.
Yeah.
But no,
Oh.
was there an inspiration for the widow's characters?
Oh, wow, you read it.
I liked how you had characters who had a range of reactions to the situation.
Thank you.
There were the women in
Yeah.
the center of town who were like, we're gonna find out all your business, we're
Yeah.
gonna use it against you.
Yeah.
The widows already know everybody's business, and they were like, yeah, let's all just have a drink.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, not necessarily good vibes only, but like,
Yeah.
safe
Good
people, safe
vibes,
space.
murder your husband vibes.
Yeah.
They both have very cinched waists. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of like,
You know the type.
you know.
Yeah.
But like just the way they enter and they just walk up, they're, how you doing? Like
Yeah,
what's,
drunk guy.
what's up? Yeah, well, yeah,
There's
and they have to
the drunk
look
guy.
after the town drunk
Yeah,
too.
no one
It's
else
like-
likes the drunk. Yeah. I love the widows, so they were based off of real people that I'd sort of read in travelogues. So if you want to get all the juicy stuff, read travelogues from the 18th century. People usually wrote more interestingly in those. Like they would sort of complain about the place or the beds or like, oh, the straw bed wasn't as good as the other
What's the
straw
name
bed.
of the lady who did it in the early 1700s?
Which one?
I don't know.
I don't know.
But she is a widow.
Oh, yeah, well, see, I found all of these characters, these widow characters, that were at taverns, or they were called ordinaries in Massachusetts. And the widows were the ones who were running the taverns. And it was seen as somehow better because, you know, they had this marriage and now, you know, they couldn't be touched, supposedly.
So it's not going to be a whore.
Yeah, it's not important. They're going to keep it together. They're going to be real. They're going to try to keep the establishment good. But you know, you're going to have a good time, right? Like they're going to take care of you. And I just thought all these women were so strong, and they sort of held their community together because the thing was, in these taverns and ordinaries, they were often the same places where sort of the public halls would be. Right, so you would go in and like vote for things in the day, and then at night they'd open the bar. A bar was literally closed with bars. That's why they're called bars, right? So they would close them with bars, and then they would open them, and you would drink, right? And you know, you didn't wait very long. It was like you'd have your beer in the morning and then get to the harder stuff in the afternoon. But I loved those women. I mean, they were so fun. So I kind of had fun playing with these sort of strong women in the book as well.
That's a cool idea. The place that was run by the sort of pushed out of society woman is where you're going to go vote. So.
You were a woman at the time. You wanted to be widowed. Like it was the sweetest spot because no one bothered you.
You had his money.
You could have a business. No one would bother you about the
You had
business.
his money.
Yeah, you had money. But also you could actually like run a business as a woman, and nobody thought it was strange.
Yeah.
Right. So they were these sort of powerful figures in the town. So you did want to kill your husband if you could. A good way to go. You know, it's harder to prove back then.
I tried to have other people kill my husband.
Did he get
I wanted them to hate us so much.
Did you get scalped or something?
I did get scalped. Just because it's a live stream, just like, scalped during a native war down with the Dutch, and so I got what I deserved.
You were banished.
Yeah, but I was on their land, I deserved it.
I mean, did you have any other choices? I feel for Anne because, you know,
I love how I keep trying to like cancel myself and be like, I love you.
Well, I mean, one like interpretation of Anne's life is like, okay, she was pushed out of this town for speaking against these men, right?
Pushed out from another town.
And pushed out of so many towns. She was like, she couldn't go anywhere. It's sort of, and so she ended up on
Living in the wilderness.
native land in the wilderness, and so she was scalped at one point, and her house was burned down, I think, too.
Yes.
Right. Which is like, okay, one narrative is she shouldn't have been on the land, but also, where was she going to go?
It's, you know, the reason why I summarize it that way, 400 years later, not only can I
You're
not
over
really
it.
remember what's going on, but it's, you know, to sort of accept the fact that there are these dark moments in history that, you know, colonization is like a huge example of that. And so to call it out and make it fun funny.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it makes people feel like, okay, yeah, that's bad, but like let's try to move on
Yeah.
in a way where we all agree. And
I mean,
think people
there's-
agree the most when that happens.
I agree. There's a lot in here that is sort of mentioned and not completely, you know, I didn't quite dive into it completely, but like, you know, it's never hidden about the fact that it's the colonial enterprise, right? So this minister is, you know, teaching these Native Americans English, and while he's doing that, he's also trying to indoctrinate them, you know, and, you know, if you have the alphabet primer, right, it starts with like, what does it start with?
A.
Yeah, in Adam's Fall.
Oh.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
You remember it?
Are you talking about the chamber pot?
Yeah,
Is it on the
no,
chamber pot?
I love the chamber pot.
I'll read the chamber.
You read the chamber pot, I'll find real quick the, I just think it's such a, oh yeah, here we go. In Adam's Fall, so this is to teach the alphabet. This is what children read and what they were teaching Native Americans. In Adam's Fall, we send all, thy life to men, this book attend. So like, right off the bat, you're like indoctrinating people with your language, so, yeah, that's in
I like
there.
that you brought that into it too, because you could have just as easily. Before reading this, the last novel that I read was a book that did the Mary Rowlandson character, and you know, that author did the whole diving into Native culture as well. But there are so many books that just ignore it,
Yeah.
and so I like that
You have to.
put
It's
it
a
in.
part of it. And I mean, the thing is, I think we always want our gay characters, our queer characters to be these like pristine, perfect beings, because we want that love story and we want to love them. But like, you know, they're very flawed in this book. I mean, the minister is sort of terrible to his daughter sometimes, he's terrible to his wife, and but that doesn't make you love him any less, I hope. You know, sort of just that's how people were. They were figures of their time.
That's how
And
it
never been. That's how they are now.
Yeah,
I guess last one, how are we gonna?
last one.
I was curious, you mentioned your scary agent. When you presented this idea, was it well received, or I was just curious?
Oh, it was well received. Yeah, I mean, I think it helped that I pitched it right whenever I was on set for Boy Erased. So it was like, hey, I got a new thing. They were like, yes, whatever. So that
I
helped.
think it helped that I pitched it when I was.
So yeah, I mean, I think they sort of took it that way, and I feel really lucky because, you know, Boy Erased was, thanks to a lot of publicity, it was like turned into a podcast. It was made into a movie. Now it's possibly going to be on Broadway, but you know, and there's like it just keeps giving, right? And so I feel like I've got a few books that I can just do whatever I want with them, and they might not sell as much, but you know, I just wanted to do this weird thing and sort of, you know, the expected thing I think was to write a sort of autobiographical, fictional account of like growing up in Arkansas, blah blah blah, sort of like what you expect. And I thought, no, I'm gonna do this like really impossible thing that might, you know, be difficult to pivot to, but I don't want to be sort of boring artist, I guess.
Okay, speaking of pivoting, so what part of my face looks the most like Nicole Kidman's? The cheekbones.
Thank you, everybody.